You're no longer needed. Your presence is no longer required. She declared unexpectedly following our endeavors. This home is adequate. Despite my 15-year-long effort to save up for and buy this property. My daughter and the others will live here with me. I went with a spacious high-rise condo for the whole family because it was her wish. But my spouse keeps getting in the way. Your role in this situation has come to an end. I told him. My expression betraying my confusion. So far. Your contributions have been much appreciated. Are you kidding me? Maintaining control among a whirlwind of emotions. I locked eyes with my husband. Proclaiming. I have reached my limit. I kept going. We can have a divorce done quickly if you're unhappy about leaving. Move quickly with your decision. I decided what to do when my ultimatum was heard. Then again. My husband was out of work and apparently unconcerned about the fallout from our divorce. He was such a disappointment. It was my deepest desire to leave this house as soon as possible. Grasped it. If that's your position, I will leave right away. He agreed. I would gladly bid farewell to never see your countenance again. They exhibited the most hideous grins I had ever seen on their faces. My contempt for such a husband and mother-in-law needed no restraint. I was hell-bent on making them immediately pay for what they had done. As a result, I got rid of the high-rise condo right away. Hi. I'm Sandra. And I'll be turning 39 years old this year. Robert and I have been married for 4 years. We worked side by side at the same company for a while. But we were never really close. But when Robert and I happened to meet paths by chance 4 years ago, everything changed. Diana. Robert. What a long time. He shouted. Why are you here? Mystified by his presence. I asked. I confessed to quitting my job today. He said. I've decided to finally do something I've always wanted to do. You know. I've been experimenting with cartooning for a while. And now I've landed my first gig. It's a very thrilling time. Do you really think that? Wow. That's amazing. You really ought to show me your work sometime. I responded. Truly impressed by his resolve. Even if my feelings for him were mundane at the time. I took great delight in his compliments. As time went on, I learned that Robert had dabbled with entrepreneurship following his departure from the corporation. Back in our 20s. When my career was booming. Our final meeting felt like a faraway memory. If you're open to it, why don't we give dating a shot? I was caught unawares by Robert's revelation. Yet it didn't make me feel uneasy. Ideas of getting married lingered in my head as I drew near my 35th birthday. His proposal. Well then. Let's tie the knot. Rendered me stunned. Really? The abruptness of the situation shocked me. In the end, I just managed to say, "Thank you," as I gave in to the sudden impulse. Everything went off without a hitch. Despite my initial fears. You've been working long hours once again, I said, offering him a cup of coffee. Yeah, the deadline is looming, he responded. Clearly committed. My marriage and my work were doing almost too well. Robert's readiness to pitch in around the house and his familiarity with my job made my life much easier. But there was something that bothered me. Is everything all right at work lately? Observing his recent early returns home, I asked. It has been really fine. Really? He reassured me. I've had some spare time. Ignoring my fears. We didn't talk much about his employment for weeks since I believed his assurances and didn't want to pry. I now wonder if I ought to have dug further in the past. I made great strides in my career and had several conversations about making comics and animations out of my creations throughout those nearly 4 years. It was my persistent want for our own house that finally got me to bring it up. What do you think about finding a place of our own? Excitedly. I proposed. A house sounds perfect. He concurred. But his expression turned gloomy as he went on. However, there's something I need to discuss. I know this might be sudden. But could my mom live with us? He made a hesitant suggestion. I was shocked and prepared myself as I realized how serious his request was. His mother has been lost and lonely ever since her husband died 2 years ago. The notion of leaving her behind weighed hard on her thoughts. And her departure left an echoing vacuum in her heart. All good. But building a house requires time. Maybe a condo would do for the time being. I gave up. Glad of his comprehension. I appreciate your consent to this. All I ask is that you be willing to make accommodations for her. He said sincerely. Putting the choice in my hands. When work got in the way, I started looking for a suitable condo. I wanted room and comfort because we would soon be sharing housing. Thank goodness I had saved a good amount of money from years of thrifty living. I completed the unit lease after 1 month of searching. I excitedly told my husband. Today. I signed the papers for our new place. Hoping he would approve. With obvious curiosity. He said. What type of condo did you choose? This one. I disclosed. Holding up the condo's brochure. I expected him to be thrilled with the selection. A luxurious condo in a high-rise. This caught me off guard. He said. Enthusiasm shining in his eyes. Mom will be thrilled. Nervous and excited at the same time. Our new life, which would include my mother-in-law, was almost here. But after we moved in together, it was obvious that we had made the wrong choice. Thank you so much, Sandra. I'm amazed that we get to live in such a beautiful location. She said with appreciation as soon as she moved in. Really? It's nothing. I just did what anyone would do. I said in a humble tone. At first, everything went according to plan. But 3 months later, she changed dramatically in attitude. Would you please clean my room? My back is acting up. She asked. Her previous friendliness gone. I apologize, Mother. But I have work to do. I said. Surprised by her suddenness. At work. You spend the entire day hiding out in your room. Giving Robert all the tasks. She acerbically charged. We came to that decision together. I shot back. Shocked by her apparent animosity. It's time to stop making excuses. She was very forceful in her demands. Making little space for compromise, just get it done. Now. Bewildered by her abrupt shift, I unwillingly followed through. Understanding that to challenge her would only sow further division. So, reluctantly, I started to carefully clean her room as she requested. She said nonchalantly. I'll be in the living room. Let me know when you're finished. Providing no help as she relaxed in elegance. Anger welled up inside me. Finally. I said. I'm done. Hoping for some recognition. Can't you clean a bit faster? She offered scathing criticism. I muttered. I'm sorry. Trying to control my annoyance. All okay. No worries. Simply remember to do it on a regular basis going forward. She said dismissively before leaving to go back to her room without saying, thank you. There was simmering anger beneath the surface. But I knew that confronting her would just fuel the flames of confrontation. So I resisted the desire. I reluctantly told my husband about the experience. He asked. Obviously agitated. Why would she behave like that? He told me. I understand. I'll talk to her too. But his tone revealed that he was unsure. He went on to say. Don't worry. I'll handle it. In an attempt to sound somewhat assured. I was relieved that he had promised me a break from her severe behavior. As it happened, her attitude toward me improved the following day. And I ventured to believe that things would get back to normal. My hopes, nevertheless, were not to last long. A week later, I came home from a meeting to hear voices I didn't recognize. I'm home, I said, looking confused. I heard bits of chatter as I walked into the living room. Where's Sandra today? Christina, Robert's sister, asked. She is in a meeting. Is it not amazing that at her age, she managed to become a successful cartoonist? Robert answered with pride. His mother interjected. Why are you so pleased? Isn't it simpler to undermine her when she feels confident? And you too, Robert. Don't you? After all, we would have a problem if she was unable to work any longer. Sandra provides for our family's income, she stated firmly. I was astounded by their cunning conversation and remained still. The fact that my mother-in-law and husband were working together against me became brutally obvious. Life turned into a living nightmare after that. Did you discuss the work issue? Unaware of the mounting tension, Christina naively prodded. Like you. I was anxiously waiting for my husband to respond so I could finally understand. Well, it's not going to change. He confessed with a sad voice that his company had gone bankrupt soon after they were married. What? Were you silent on that? My reaction was one of disbelief, with the burden of treachery pressing heavily on my shoulders. I said. I've been through so much. I was lucky because when I suggested Sandra move in with my mom, I never saw the twist of fate that would happen. When Robert told me, I was taken aback. As opposed to my normal state of amazement. I felt sick to my stomach at the thought of being tricked and at his dishonest demeanor. Worst regret of my life washed over me as I wished I hadn't ignored the warning signs of my husband's change. It was unproductive. Nevertheless, to linger on regrets forever. I wondered if the moment had come to leave. And I thought about when to leave. So why is it being done? We might laugh about that in retrospect. I stormed in the door, catching them off guard. Since I could take no more of their chatter, my return hadn't been anticipated by them. What's happening? I asked with purpose, watching my husband and mother-in-law's embarrassed expression. I pulled myself together just in time to hold back the laughing. I was scared of you. My spouse shot back that I should have made an announcement when I returned. I did say I'm home. But perhaps you were engrossed in your discussion, said I. My mother-in-law waved Sandra over to have coffee with us. Ignoring the tension, Sandra answered with gratitude, saying, "Thank you." It seemed like forever just talking about nothing of significance. Christina gave notice that she was leaving 1 hour later. "I need to go home right now," she announced. "You might want to extend your stay a bit," my mother-in-law proposed. "I wish I could. But I have plans," Christina responded. My mother-in-law offered to accompany us for a portion of the journey. As soon as Christina sensed my dislike for them, she hurriedly said, "Goodbye." A frightened muttering of, "Thank you for hosting me today," came out of her mouth. "Did you enjoy yourself?" I asked. Yes," Christina faltered, her anxious emotion showing through her facial expression. After sensing her unease, I couldn't help but warn her. "Christina, you just can't put all your faith in them," I whispered under my breath. Christina probably knew my plans from that day on, because she never returned for another visit. I couldn't stop thinking about how to get even with my husband and mother-in-law. My next move was carefully plotted out every day. I couldn't help but burst into laughing as I walked up to the mailbox and noticed a letter addressed to Robert. I thought it could be useful just looking at it, I declared. "Off to work," with an air of sincerity. My interest regarding his real destination already piqued. In an effort to find out where he was, I decided on the fly to follow him. He spent some time in the park, which I watched when he eventually went to a casino. With an eye toward its potential future use, I stealthily took photographs of his actions. I was confused and annoyed by his involvement in such frivolous activities. Even if he was unemployed, I was in for a rude awakening when I got home, a badly made dinner. My earlier chat probably prompted my mother-in-law to resume her unwanted critiques, which reawakened my desire for revenge. Given Robert's culinary ineptitude, I confronted her harsh comments with a sad satisfaction. Knowing that I was the only one to blame, I was still intent on coming up with a suitable revenge, even if her allegations hurt. When I was at a loss for what to do, I turned to my mother for advice. I was surprised by how sympathetic her response was. Given my concerns, she then made a straightforward but profound advice after explaining everything: sell the condo. I had never considered it before, but her remarks really got to me. I felt a surge of vengeful pleasure at the thought of robbing them of their beloved home. I was astounded by my mother's wisdom when I was enthralled by the idea's possible consequences. I felt a renewed sense of resolve after hearing her words of support. "Sandra, I'm not going anywhere," she told me. "Remember, we're on your side." Her words reignited my determination and set my heart ablaze. I expressed my gratitude and promised to always have her advice on hand, which gave me a new feeling of direction. I felt an electric current of inspiration flowing through me when we wrapped up our talk. I was prepared to face any obstacles that came my way since I had a strategy and my family's unfaltering support. One evening after dinner, as I was cleaning up and thinking about my mother's advice, Robert came over and indicated we should talk. As I sat there as directed, a sense of unease persisted as Robert and my mother-in-law grinned at each other. "So, what's this about?" I asked cautiously, only to have my mother-in-law cut me off with the direct statement, "You're not wanted here anymore. Kindly depart now." "Why do you think that?" "This residence." I tried to speak up, but she interrupted. her comments full of contempt for my feelings. Enough is enough. I've made the decision to move in with Christina and other people, she said sarcastically. I thought back to that day's cryptic chat and understood this was the fun she had alluded to. Robert went on. Why the shock? This is the end of your role here. I appreciate everything you've done so far. Overwhelmed by feelings and on the verge of losing control, I looked directly into Robert's eyes. I shot back, my resolve firming. Of course. If you're so keen on my leaving, we can proceed with a divorce. His casual reply only served to validate my choice. I was disappointed in his lack of planning, so I started getting ready to go right away. I picked up what I needed and left without thinking twice, ignoring their disdainful grins. Their ugly nature simply made me more determined to get even. I had no regrets or yearnings as I walked away because divorce was unavoidable. Get the paperwork ready. Don't worry about the apartment. We'll handle it well, I said, stepping aside from their snide chuckles. I was comforted by my parents' familiar presence when I went back to their house. Their kind greeting relieved me of a weight I had carried for far too long. I slept well that night, forgetting about the chaos of the past. Driven by my renewed determination, I assumed leadership the following day. The divorce papers were quickly prepared, and I was officially free. The real estate agent's office would be my next destination, where I would forge my own path free from the poisons of the past. Giving up the condo proved to be a better decision than letting my mother-in-law and ex-husband live there. Their situation would be terrible if they had nowhere to reside while they were unemployed. It seemed reasonable that a buyer could be found fast, given its popularity. The real estate agent informed me of a possible buyer's interest a month later. They were strangers to me by then because the divorce had already been formalized. There was something strangely exciting about the thought of meeting these ignorant people. Robert's shocked cry filled the room the day of the exhibition when I opened the door. Who opened the door for you? And who are these individuals? It was his lack of awareness of me that made me move forward. It's been a while, hasn't it? I said, addressing him directly, in a detached tone. My frustration was reflected in his perplexity. This condo is in my name, I explained, seeing his sluggish understanding. My mother-in-law's arrival on schedule gave me the ideal chance to share my ideas. Why are you making such a fuss? She asked, not realizing what was about to happen. I said, this place doesn't belong to you. With firmness, enjoying their incredulity. Their objections were ignored when I told them I was going to sell the land. The brutal reality only served to confirm their already deeply held incredulity. Where are we supposed to live? Robert demanded, clearly angry. Perhaps your parents' house. With a hint of irony, I made a suggestion. His pointless attempt to seize me was met with ridicule from others around him. I suggest you leave if you don't want the police involved, I said, casting a pitying yet mocking glance at him. His expression seemed to be on the verge of tears when I caught a glance of his face. It was as if he had just realized how serious the situation was. Then he got down on his knees and implored me for mercy, even though it was fruitless. We had made a mistake and were asking for forgiveness. But no amount of pleading could change my mind. He begged me to apologize to her too. Mom. But I didn't see the point. My apologies are pointless at this point, I ordered. Go away from here. As my tolerance was wearing low, Robert, with his mother trailing behind, bolted like a defeated beast. And a wave of relief swept over me. The following steps went off without a hitch. And the deal closed. Last but not least, I was lenient and told the couple to leave the condo immediately. Just as I was getting lost in thought, Christina called. What's the matter? Christina. I wanted to know what happened to them. So I asked. It turned out that they now live in a tiny, one-bedroom apartment, maybe proof that my warning was right. I told Christina not to become involved with their problems. And she did just that. She skipped the viewing. I warned her to keep your distance from them henceforth. And she seemed to gladly accept my advice. Robert was in a jam he had created for himself by dishonesty and gambling. But he kept coming back to me, pleading for money. His obligations continued. And he still hadn't achieved his goals. No matter how much effort he put in. I rudely declined, saying, "Your problems are not my problems to solve." And then I cut off the phone. As far as anyone could tell, their hardships were far from done. As I reflected on these events, the idea of turning them into a comic strip into my mind. It would be a fascinating story about overcoming obstacles and making foolish decisions. And it would be perfect for my next creative project. After watching the first story above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Next, let's watch another similar story. My job keeps me rooted to my home. And my name is Lindsay. I'm 30 years old. My spouse is still too focused on himself to see the significance of the things we formerly treasured. He is astounded by the change that money has brought about in him. All I can do is lament our loss since we can't go back to how we were. An ingrained hatred for my judgmental mother-in-law and my harsh-speaking spouse rots away in the depths of my soul. The man who would later become my husband was introduced to me by a friend who felt sorry for my love misfortune. We quickly became so accustomed to each other's company that our conversations became daily exchanges. Despite my feelings being returned, we moved quickly through the courtship process, which ended with a marriage proposal. Our marriage went off without a hitch. And we welcomed our daughter, Katie, into the world not long after. But disagreements arose when Katie started her kindergarten adventure. All of a sudden, my spouse started disappearing on weekends, staying out later and later in the nights. His mobile phone became an extension of himself, always by his side. The man who used to be so excited to get home and spend weekends playing with our kid is no more. He is now blaming my continual presence at home and bemoaning his exhaustion in an effort to avoid allegations. I am perplexed by his startling metamorphosis. My freelancing work has been a commitment of mine since before we were married. So it's been difficult to carve out time for Katie with all these impending obligations. Even though Katie means well, she often says things like, "Mommy, I'll draw next to you," which distracts me from my work on weekends when my husband is gone. When I told my parents-in-law about the changes in our relationship, they enthusiastically offered to take care of Katie, saying, "For our dear granddaughter." So they've been making an effort to spend more time with Katie recently, which has helped her avoid feeling lonely. But when I ask my husband for aid because of an unforeseen meeting and my parents aren't available, he becomes angry. Why am I obligated to take care of her during my free time? As for taking her with you, he says in a contemptuous tone, by this point. His apathy is par for the course. Clinging to my leg, Katie says, "Mommy." A plea that may have been overheard on the phone. Sensing a change in my thoughts towards him, I apologize for not giving her more thought and for trying to reassure her when we were hugging. And she embraced me back with all her strength. Surprisingly, she goes on to say that she wants to go see Grandma, even though I had planned to take her there later. "Mommy, aren't you employed?" she says. "I want to play with you so bad. But it's all right because Grandma said she'd get me a toy." Her adorable smile is back. After I tell her what happened, I bring her to see my parents, where she plays joyfully with my dad like nothing ever happened. To be honest, I had no idea this would be their final chat. The conference is being disrupted by the continual ringing of my phone, which is coming from an unknown number. As soon as I answer it, the terrible news hits me: my parents and Katie were killed in an accident. A shiver goes down my back, making the other person's voice sound like nothing more than air. I couldn't escape the sensation that I had just said goodbye to them when shock washed over me. Even yet, I had a sneaking suspicion that I would never see Katie or my parents again. Quickly departing from the conference, I frantically attempted to contact my husband, but he remained unresponsive, further exacerbating my anger. My worry for his location diminished in the face of my insurmountable anguish. Even though he has been missing since the night before. Confronting the quiet abyss of simultaneously losing my loved ones, I suppressed my resentment against him during this period. My heart ached, and I didn't know how to express my grief. I wondered why our family had to go through this. How could they have slipped my mind when I thought of all the times we had laughed together? My daughter's sweet voice calling me "Umami" will never again grace my ears. No matter how much I clutched to her and repeated her name through sobs. The funeral followed. Having endured the police formalities, devoid of a fitting farewell and unable to reconcile my feelings, Katie's absence reverberated throughout the empty room. Days went by, and I was still immobilized. Only a shadow of the person I used to be. Days after Katie died away, my husband asked me a question that hurt. "How come you're crying now? What's not right?" I let my guard down and revealed the terrible news that Katie and my parents had passed away. His astonished reply alluded to his culpability, awkwardly sidestepping my charges. But when he made weak justifications rather than a real apology, my fury finally boiled over. "I apologize for Katie. Please make sure I show up to the wake and funeral, and behave like a father ought to," he said, trying to wave aside his failures, as he continued to deny his neglect and the suffering he caused. My patience began to run thin. "Your apologies should extend beyond this affair," I sighed. "Promise to end it before we bid our final farewell to Katie. You understand what being a father is all about. I'll take care of it." His eyes met mine with a true earnestness that accompanied his remarks. Even though they did not absolve him of his previous conduct with Katie, I hesitantly decided to believe his honesty even though my wounds weren't even close to healing. I eventually mustered the will to face everyday life once more, for Katie's sake and my parents'. Then, out of the blue, my husband started being the kind, caring person he used to be, showing me his concern and expressing our shared pain. He called his mom, Laura, for help, and she came running to our rescue, taking care of the housework, Her support was appreciated at first. But as the days stretched into weeks, her presence grew oppressive. Laura's visits, which were first excused by her husband's work travels, became a near constant presence in our home. She'd insist, "You should rest, Lindsay," quickly taking over whatever I tried to do. She insisted on going on despite my objections, pointing to her son's plea for help. Laura's constant presence made me more stressed when I struggled with sadness and tried to get by without Katie and my parents. I became even more uneasy when I chanced to overhear a conversation between my mother-in-law and husband that suggested there were hidden agendas. I began to wonder about their motives when I saw how careless they were with my personal space. When the wake and funeral day drew near, my spouse took on the role of family representative while I became overburdened with preparations. He didn't say anything when my family members accused him of being careless with Katie in the past, but his tears showed that he was sorry. However, his absences continued during the morning, which made me question whether real change was conceivable. He cut off all communication with Katie, although it seemed he actually cared about her, providing some little comfort. When Katie was still with us, I had hoped that he would come back on his own. But now that she is not, such melancholy thoughts are pointless. His eyes began to bubble up with tears, and I gave in to my own uncontrollable crying. I regret not spending more time and energy with Katie, even though I've been telling her about my work commitments non-stop. We made it through the solemn wake and funeral ceremonies somehow, saying our goodbyes to all three of them, my husband and, of course, my mother-in-law were waiting for me when I finally made it home. Maybe during the funeral service she learned something. Taking advantage of my absence once more, she brought up the subject of the purported $3 million inheritance. "I've heard rumors about it," she stated in a firm tone. I gave her instructions to accurately verify the material. Not knowing the specifics, my mother-in-law accepted the situation, brushing off possible revelation before the burial. When we got around to discussing the considerable amount, she didn't take long to start making expensive buy suggestions, which made my husband quite happy. Enveloped in the excitement, my mother-in-law asked an unexpected question concerning the bequest, which sparked conversations about taking out loans against the forthcoming windfall. Their haste to talk money right after the burial bothered me when they pondered, without even looking at me, my previous optimism that he would get back in touch with Katie and resume his position as a devoted husband was dashed. If an apology doesn't include an admission of guilt, what good is it? His decision to remain silent throughout the burial was a clear indication of his priorities. It was his way of avoiding family criticism. His behaviors reveal a concentrated emphasis on monetary gain, despite his seeming anguish. Now that I know this, I feel completely stupid. I couldn't bear to watch those two carry on their conversation unabated, even though I've apologized to Katie countless times in my heart, knowing that we will never see each other again. With his casual announcement, "I bought a luxury condo," he caught me off guard. I had overheard his talks with his mother, so it wasn't completely unexpected. But he doesn't seem to notice his serious miscommunication. It would be great to move back in with my parents, wouldn't it? So that's why I purchased it, he insisted, completely unaware of how grave his error in judgment was. What on earth are you referring to? I thought everything was taken care of because we inherited $3 million. As if his decision to act unilaterally were warranted, he persisted. What did you have in mind? Just to keep it all to yourself. He ignored my attempts to argue with him and continued to spin his own tale. Which assumptions I found irritating. Hey. I haven't received any inheritance yet. I'm disappointed by his pettiness. I interrupted. To what end did you pay for it? He was obviously being dishonest. Yet I nevertheless challenged him after seeing his evasive stare. You made a decision without asking me for advice. So why? After the funeral. Are we to go back to our regular lives? However. He simply scoffed and said. It's because you wouldn't talk. Simply expressing regret won't make it okay. He shouted back. His voice betraying his animosity. His mother, who knew all about their secret deals, stormed in before he could finish. She abruptly came in and said, "Thank you, Lindsay, for allowing us to purchase the luxury condo." Which caught me unconscious. What are you talking about? I shot back. Her arrogance getting under my skin. I take it the bequest is $3 million. I firmly stated. Becoming increasingly offended by her arrogance. That's why we purchased the luxury property. I quickly added. I wasn't informed about that. As my tolerance was wearing thin. Laura. How is the bequest relevant to your situation? Leaving this house is not in my plans. Hoarding the inheritance isn't right. I said. My irritation growing. But you can do what you like. Are you getting the bequest? Just like my husband's naivete. She adamantly believed that my son could also benefit from it. I became frustrated and angry because they didn't understand. That's irrelevant. I shot back. She responded coldly. It's only natural you contribute to your in-laws if you married into our family. And I was taken aback by her remarks. My husband's nonchalant suggestion of divorce just added to my shock as I tried to make sense of their outrageous demands. Even though my mother-in-law and I were having a violent argument, my spouse showed no emotion. At last he broke his stillness and said, "Enough talking. Nothing will be altered by it. How about we separate?" He stared at me with an icy intensity that was new to me. The thought that such remarks ought to have originated from me persisted. Nevertheless, the marriage had already broken down irretrievably. Adding, "No complaints." Right. He seemed to be affirming his own determination. It looked like my approval pushed him over the edge into actually filing for a divorce. Something I had suspected he had been considering. Leaving the divorce papers behind. They hurriedly left without batting an eye at the image of Katie. I thought about moving and the possibility of needing a new beginning while I completed the paperwork to end my marriage. But I was bound to this place by the prospect of leaving Katie's memories behind. Even though it hurt to be apart from her, I couldn't let go of the physical things that reminded me of her. My ex-husband showed up unannounced right when I was starting to adjust to my newfound independence. He spoke out suddenly and demanded, "When are you going to transfer the inheritance?" I sought clarification. My mind spinning. What inheritance? I asked, trying to make sense of his claim. The inheritance. He explained. Since you still haven't sent the funds, I had to take out a loan to finance the purchase of the high-end property. And now I'm in a jam. I was shocked by what he said. Do you actually believe you're entitled to receive the inheritance? Anger began to seep into my voice as I asked. The money I inherited from my parents is not shared property. As I have been stating from the beginning. You don't have any right to it. I said, hoping to correct his mistaken assumption. His forward motion stalled. And he seemed speechless. His desperation was evident as he pleaded. Then what about the loan? My refusal to accept responsibility for his financial choices was reflected in my stern reminder that he had chosen to purchase the item and take out the loan independently. It's your fault for the inadequate explanation. What should I do at this point? I have no income and left my work a long time ago. Believing I would inherit the property. My ex-husband made an arrogant statement. You have $3 million. So you should pay off the loan and give me living expenses. His boldness infuriated me. So I said. Enough. You expected me to correct your mistake after you made the decision and misunderstood on your own. You are the one who made the choice. And financial gain is your only priority. Katie has never been important to you. You truly are self-centered. It was impossible to put up with his conceit. What sort of nerve are you? You exhibit excessive selfishness. I cried out, growing impatient. There was nothing more to talk about if, after everything I'd said, he still couldn't see my point of view. That's it if, after everything I've said, you still can't think of anything to say and you haven't even prayed for Katie. It doesn't concern me if you are unable to make ends meet or pay off your debts. I said calmly but forcefully, guiding him out of the house. Please don't come back. I have no intention of helping you. Just when I was about to shut the door, I noticed some activity outside. A harsh, unexpectedly familiar voice chastised my spouse. It was my father-in-law, who had shown up to the wake and funeral and expressed his sincere sympathy. With a look of concern on his face, he inquired about my food and sleeping patterns and offered to help in any way he could. His generosity touched my heart, and I confided in him about my ex-husband's demands. Buoyed by his empathy, I shared the information with my father-in-law and asked him to explain, all the while trying not to see my ex-husband's and mother-in-law's agitated looks. My father-in-law questioned my ex-husband's activities and wouldn't take no for an answer, his voice becoming more severe in response. He stood by my side and showed me that he cared about me sincerely, confirming my belief. His attitude was one of sincere regret when he apologized and acknowledged the difficulty that had occurred during this difficult time. I reluctantly revealed the specifics of the backstabbing conversations about inheritance and buying an opulent condo, as well as the nasty comments from my mother-in-law. Even though my mother-in-law had already shared part of the information with him, my father-in-law didn't seem to know the whole story. His apologies was a mixture of regret and outrage, expressing his inability to find the right words to describe the circumstances. I'm at a loss, Lindsay, he admitted while pledging to stop it from happening again. Thankful, I said goodbye to them and listened as my mother-in-law and husband continued to defend themselves in the background, despite the fact that they had many justifications. I decided to ignore them and shut the door on them. My father-in-law was the only one there at the memorial service 1 month later. My mother-in-law and husband both wanted to go with him, but they honored my request that they not go. My father-in-law apologized again and again for what they had done. And he meant it. We said prayers together for Katie's and my parents' souls. My father-in-law was surprised to learn that the lavish condo had been sold because of financial difficulties only after he had returned from a business trip and grinned sardonically. Ultimately, I filed for divorce without objecting to the split of our assets. leaving my husband perplexed by my choice to break things off. He masked his worry with a low laugh that missed his eyes as he conjectured about the weight of debt he now had to bear. After a brief exchange of words, his intentions were obvious. After overcoming my challenges and making resolutions, I was able to bring some calm into my everyday life. I will continue to pray for my parents and Katie, finding strength in the heavenly watchmen who watch over me every day. After watching the stories above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. If you enjoyed our video, please like, subscribe, and share our channel. That's all about today's stories. See you next time.